We're live. What's up, everybody? Welcome to Respawn Aim Fire, the kick-ass irreverent gaming podcast from Affable Idiots. We are talking today about BioShock Infinite. This is a side quest for BARF. Backlog accomplishment with Respawn and friends. Speaking of friends, I'm Chad Michaelinis. We've got Holden DePardo over there in Rhode Island. And we've got Matt from Rhode Island over there also in Rhode Island. Say hey, Matt.
Hey, what's up?
You guys know Matt. He's the best. We played BioShock Infinite this month for BARF. It is the third BioShock installment that we've played as part of BARF. It is the third in the world that exists as a BioShock installment as well. And goddamn, what a fucking amazing game this is. That's all I'm going to say right now as we start. I want to get top-level impressions from you guys, and then we'll go. I got, like, history of it, all this kind of stuff, some, like, facts about it, and then we'll discuss the game in depth. So, yeah, I fucking loved this game. This game has single-handedly, and its DLC, cemented it as my favorite game franchise of all time. Like, the three of these games together. What did you guys think? Let's start with Holden in your dark, gloomy corner.
So, speaking of dark and gloomy, I'm not quite as positive, I think, as you on this one. I was thinking masterpiece levels, and then I got to the end, I'm kind of like, didn't like the ending that much. And by extension, because of that ending, I didn't really like Burial of Sea either. And I'll go more in depth on that in the podcast. But, like, I know. I absolutely, like, throughout the game, I'm going, this is hands down the best BioShock, period. And then just the end, I'm kind of like, yeah, I really like the game, love the game, would highly recommend the game. I'm just not super crazy about the ending of the game.
Matt.
I loved it. I'm with you, Chad. I think it kind of cemented it as my favorite video game franchise, like all together as one. Definitely. I remember I played it on the 360 when it first came out, and I remember it being my favorite BioShock game. And I remember all these years, like even with the remastered version coming on PlayStation and everything, I remember me thinking, continuing to think that. And I was like, well, I wonder if it actually holds up. And now being able to go back and actually play it again and get like a refresher on it, it absolutely is my favorite of the three. Burial at Sea 1 and 2, we'll talk about it in depth, but it really does a great job of tying up the entire, not even just Infinite, and explaining more and giving more backstory to Infinite that's useful and not just fluff, but it really ties up the entire franchise as one. It's amazing, and it's super fun to play as well.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat where I had played it back on PS3 when it came out in 2013. I remember being real high on it then, too. And then just re-remembering it now. It's amazing how much of that I forgot in 7 years. Holden, this was your first time playing it, though, right?
Yes. Every BARF has been my first time playing
I joked earlier that BARF is just me watching Holden play play old games for the first time, because I've played like 80% of the games we played for BARF already, but I just love watching you play them and experience them through your eyes. I've got a couple of things about...
Especially Banjo, where I just shit all over it.
Did you shit all over Banjo? I don't even remember. Last month was a blur.
No, I just the end of it. Just the stupid fucking quiz game at the end of that game.
I have a couple of things to say about
I liked Banjo,
the
just
development of it, all that kind of stuff. It was released March 26, 2013. So yesterday was the 7-year anniversary of this game. Happy birthday! It was developed by Irrational Games, published by 2K Games, with Ken Levine working as a creative director. Interestingly enough, this was Ken and Irrational Games passed on doing BioShock 2. So they didn't want to do a sequel to BioShock. And instead, at the same time, said, we want to make a different BioShock. So BioShock 2 and Infinite were developed in tandem, like at the same time. They were working on it for several years, since 2008 up until 2013, so it's 5 years. Everything was developed from scratch. There were no reused assets from BioShock 1, which was really interesting, even for Burial at Sea, so they even recreated parts of Rapture for that. As it neared release, numerous materials such as vigors, tear mechanics, weapons, locations, characters, and other enemies were cut from it, and there were claims that enough material for 5 or 6 games had been scrapped during that process, which was really fascinating. And you could tell...
wow.
An interesting story that I read while I was trying to figure out something about like whether you can actually buy a vigor. Do you guys remember seeing all around the place that there's places to pick up salts to refuel your vigors, but then you could also pick up other vigors again, and it would just do the same thing?
Yeah.
Apparently, and this was part of the E3 demo too, before the game released, they had it basically, instead of you have a vigor and you can use it as many times as you want as long as you have salt, it was more of you picked up 5 bucking broncos, you can use bucking bronco 5 times. Which is why you had them littered all over the world, and then they changed the way that worked pretty close to release, and then they're like, well, we'll just fucking leave all those and just make them salt again. Which is why in the first
it did
area...
make sense, though. Yeah.
Yeah, in the first area, you can buy bucking bronco. Well, bucking bronco is for sale, but you don't have enough money to buy it, and that's why. It was there was part of the E3 demo. It was like you could buy this one use of bucking bronco during the demo. So I thought that was pretty interesting that like a lot of this game was like cut or reworked pretty close to release.
That is super interesting.
What's cool about that too is I always thought that, that's cool world building, because they wouldn't just have one bottle of bucking bronco around. They'd be all over the place. So I was like, it's good world building. It's actually kind of cool they came from a change in development.
Yeah.
Interesting.
We are talking today about Burial at Sea as well, which is the DLC that was released in 2 parts over November 12th was the first part, and then March 25th. Can you imagine having to wait like 6 months in order to play? It was what? No, it was 8 months. 8 months in order to play Burial at Sea 1. Actually, that would be fine for me because BioShock Infinite, we'll talk about this more in a little bit. I felt like BioShock Infinite itself is complete. And then knowing that Burial at Sea came later, I was like, oh, I don't know what more story I need. And then as soon as I got part 1 of that, I was like, fuck, I need part 2 right now. So I can't imagine waiting from November to March for part 2.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then critically...
That actually makes a lot of sense, that 6-month gap. Makes a ton of sense. Yeah. I only have
one more thing before we talk like about our own experience with it. One is that it was critically regarded as one of the top games of the generation for that round of consoles. It sits at a 94 on Metacritic right now for PS4 and the Xbox, and the PC version, 93 for Xbox. And it received 10 out of 10s from a lot of major outlets. Unfortunately, that year, while it was nominated for a ton of shit, it went up for Game of the Year against Last of Us. So obviously, it lost.
Yeah,
but. What's interesting about that is being at 94. I remember the conversation. Critically, it was getting praised. It was getting praised a lot, but I remember the conversation like among the community and among just like regular consumers being like, "Oh man, it's a departure from the original BioShock, and the horror elements are missing, and it's like the black sheep of the family," is what a lot of people I remember people talking about it, even though I myself was like really high on it. So like to go back and see that critics were really high on it was interesting. With that, I want to jump into differences between it, like how does this compare BioShock Infinite from the original BioShock 1 and 2, and whether you guys like those changes.
I love the changes, personally. Like, gameplay-wise, I prefer BioShock Infinite. I thought that the skyline rails and all that was just sick. That was so much fun. Really, we're talking about gameplay specifically, not the story,
right?
In
a little bit.
Okay, yeah. So like the mechanics that were really, really good there, and it borrowed the right things from BioShock in terms of like having the vigors, but they're not vigors this time. Like having a shield was a nice improvement, I think, because sometimes at BioShock, I don't know if you can ever play this game and not get hit once. I think it's impossible. I'm sure someone has figured out a way to do it, but it seems impossible. So like the shield is kind of like a nice thing to have there as well. But the momentum of the gameplay I thought was a lot more intense this time around, and that really stuck out to me.
Yeah, I prefer BioShock Infinite's like wide open spaces. I keep hitting my microphone. I prefer the wide open spaces as opposed to like Rapture's like tight like corridors, and like you break out into bigger, 2-story rooms some of the times. But with Infinite, you really have like your exploit on the rail system, which is fantastic. Holden, I echo you on that. That's fantastic, and I really just enjoy the brighter scene, even though there are some dark parts to it. But I enjoy the brighter. And Rapture is beautiful, on its own. But I think I prefer the style of Infinite to the first 2 BioShock games for sure.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
And I love Murder Crows.
I agree with you both on
Murder
like
Crows.
the mechanics of the skyhooks and all that kind of stuff was really dope. Being able to jump off of those things and just like instantly kill an enemy on the ground was super satisfying. I also like the verticality and how much that played into like all the different things you could do and ways that you could tackle a situation. Like I could sit on the ground and I could use my vigors to light a pile of oil on fire. I could electrocute someone sitting in water like I could in BioShock, but then I could also like jump up and headshot people from the skyline. I could do the skyline hook. I could jump from skyline to skyline. It was it added a lot of option and choice. What did you think of the only having 2 guns versus previous BioShock where you could have all of the guns as you kind of go?
From my, like, the trophy side of me, it was annoying because I wanted to have a bunch of guns on me to get all the trophies for you have to kill a certain amount of people with the guns. But as far as gameplay goes, I really only used the hand cannon and the machine gun. That was it. And so if I could just have those 2 weapons on me and I'd be good. Maybe the sniper rifle. But so yeah, having 2 didn't bother me. It didn't bother me at all.
I preferred it as well. I had just the shotgun and the machine gun. That's kind of like my 2 I'd go back and forth through. I didn't really experiment with anything else unless I absolutely had to. But I think I preferred it because, and this is true of BioShock as well as BioShock Infinite, and this is going into the story a little bit, but the goal of the protagonist is to kind of scavenge your way through this world. And being able just to kind of swap out guns like that and take them off enemies felt more true to that world than having this gun ring. And so it made me buy into that world just because that subtle little mechanic change.
Nice. Yeah, I was in the same boat as Matt, where basically there's a machine gun and the hand cannon for the last part of the game. Going in for trophies, I was knowing that I had to like kill 30 people with the sniper rifle, kill 50 people with whatever. Whenever I found a gun that seemed like it didn't show up all the time, I was like, great, I'm only using this now to get as many kills as I can, and then I'll throw it away and pick up something more common like the carbine or the machine gun or something like that. But yeah, I eventually, after I got all the trophies I needed to get out of those, I eventually just settled on machine gun for rapid fire, and then that hand cannon was so good.
Hand cannon's so satisfying.
Get a headshot with that thing, and you're just like, I don't need to have sex again for years.
I feel like I had the same. I feel like I had the same power as the shotgun, but with more range, which is exactly, I think, what is a perfect mix of weapon in that game.
Yeah. What were your favorite vigors?
I already said it. Crows.
Oh, electric.
The crows. 100%.
Crows?
Crow traps. Yeah, I love throwing the crow traps down. It's so good. So good. And watching the guys just freak. It's great because I like the vigors that will distract them. So you have, shoot, I already forget it. When you can turn them to your side.
Possession.
What is it? Possession. Possession's great.
Yeah.
But it doesn't necessarily like take their attention off of you. Murder crows, they're absolutely just not paying attention to you at all, and you can kind of work the room how you see fit with that. And the traps are great, and then when you upgrade it, and if a murder of crows kills an enemy, they turn into a trap, and it's just this domino effect of chaos that just works perfectly in some areas of the game. It's so good.
Nice.
What about you guys?
The electroshock was my default, just especially when you can string it together and get a bunch of people like in a row. Like electrocution just paused for a second. That was really satisfying, especially in the later game area where you don't have any ammo coming to you and you have those like, what are there? They're like the people who have like the weird metal heads and are looking around, and as soon as they see you, you're in the atrium and they see you. Yes, and then everyone else starts chasing after you. Since you don't have that much to work off of there, I would just electrocute a bunch of them, then use my shotgun to spray damage across all of them, and that worked really, really well for me. Possession, I definitely hear you that it doesn't distract enemies. That actually, I should have used the crows because that's a really good point. I used the possession a lot when they were throwing like 2 Patriots at you towards the later part of the game. And like, I'm going to possess that Patriot, and then I'll worry about this other Patriot that's not possessed while my friendly Patriot is fighting off guys for me. So I kind of like used possession that way a lot. But that's very similar to how it worked in BioShock. I'm pretty sure BioShock had the same thing. Yeah, it did. Loved that. Those 2. It was probably the most that I used. The rest of them I didn't use too much. I kept getting new ones, like the water ability where you kind of like flush people out. And I'm like, I used it once. And I'm like, that was cool, but I have this really good thing going with my electroshock right now, and I'm just going to keep doing that. I have so many of them that I can use, so like I'm just going to keep doing that. So I kind of just like shotgun and machine gun the whole time. I just kind of went between possession and electro the entire time, and occasionally use the fireball to destroy like turrets and things like that.
I admittedly played the game through on easy. I had already beat the game once whenever I was on PS3. I played it through this time on easy to sweep up most of the trophies, and then I'm going back now. I'm on the 1999 mode without using dollar bill stations to try to get the platinum. And so things were easy enough with the guns that I find myself not using the vigors that much outside of like trying to get whatever trophy was associated with them. However, towards the end of the game, I found a real appreciation for Undertow. Like there were times when you're on like when you're coming from on your way to Comstocks and you have like all the different airships that are just coming down beside you as you ascend, and you have to take care of like 4 guys on this one. You can literally just like Undertow and all 5 of them fly off that ship at the same time, and they're all dead. And then the next ship comes, and you're just like, boop, they're all dead.
Oh,
and it's also really helpful. At the very end, the very, very last fight. By the way, if you're listening to this, obviously spoilers. If you haven't played the games yet, go play the games. And this game has a ton of spoilers. The very last fight, which is just like an onslaught of airships and Patriots and all these kind of things, you can get up to the very, very top of the ship, and you can use Undertow to get all the Patriots and just bring them all up there with you so they can't attack the ship and do damage to it. And then you just jump down, fight all the little guys, and then you can just like toss the fire thing up there and just like destroy them or possess them. So like I found Undertow to maybe be my favorite one towards the end of the game, but the rest of the game I didn't really use most of them.
Interesting. Because that part was hard. That was a really hard part.
I'm not looking forward to doing that on 1999 mode.
It's tough.
Well, I was playing hard the entire time, and I'm like, this actually isn't that hard. I found this was actually a lot easier than BioShock was. And then I got to that part of like, fuck it, I'm going to normal. This is ridiculous.
Yeah. I played it on hard, and I wish I had done it the way you did it, Chad. I wish I had done it on easy and then gone back for 1999, because now I feel like I have to play, you know what I mean? I have to play it twice through, like on a really hard mode. And I cleaned up most of the trophies going through on hard. But, yeah.
Let's talk about the story of BioShock Infinite, which is, I think, where it shines, where everybody seems to like it. Holden didn't like the ending, though. What did you think of actually having the protagonist? This is a departure from BioShock 1 and 2, where you actually have a protagonist that speaks, and he has a mission. Like, he is a character, voiced by Troy Baker, along with having Elizabeth, like a companion for the first time. Who, interestingly enough, voiced by Courtney Draper, and Elizabeth was also inspired by Alex Vance from Half-Life 2. Half-Life Alex just came out this week as well, interestingly enough. Happy birthday, Half-Life Alex, you're born. So what did you think about having like an actual speaking protagonist in terms of this this kind of narrative that we had?
I didn't even remember that BioShock had a silent protagonist. I totally had forgotten that. I'm playing BioShock Infinite kind of going, yeah, the protagonist is talking. I never really even thought about it too much. It just felt natural and in the world and totally great. Especially since it helps with the relationship between, I almost said Comstock, between DeWitt and Elizabeth.
Spoilers, Comstock and DeWitt are the same person.
Well, we already said spoilers.
I loved that you have your character, the character you're playing, like speaks to the environment, speaks to other characters, and especially Elizabeth. The back and forth between Booker and Elizabeth is fantastic, and I thought they did a great job with the voice acting, obviously, because 2 pros right there. But when they're going through the story, Booker and Elizabeth, they have their ups and downs as far as like their relationship, and there are some parts where it's very tense, and whenever Booker is talking to Elizabeth during those parts, you can feel that. And then there's other parts where there's levity, and you can also feel that as well. And it never felt out of place. Like, it never felt like... And I think they did a good job of mixing up the quips, like, for when Elizabeth unlocks, like, does a lockpick. Because they don't do, like, the fun, like, jovial ones where she, like, is basically just, like, ragging on how easy it is to unlock these lockpicks when she's mad at Booker. And I thought that was great. And Booker, just like the whole time, this character, you're unraveling just as much about Elizabeth as you are about Booker and all the characters around you, like, as the story goes on. And I thought that, like, they did a good job. Like, BioShock 1 and 2, the characters you're playing are very mysterious. And they stay pretty mysterious. With Booker, you get all the way down to the core, the center of the onion, if you will, with that. So And I thought it was great. And Booker's one of my favorite video game characters of all time. I have his pop figure somewhere up in this room somewhere. He's awesome. I love Booker.
Yeah, Booker was great. I really loved it's. I could not see this game being done without having him talk, because you have to have his involvement, seeing as like the villain is him as well. You have to have him talking through and like discovering that on his own as you go. You can't just have someone telling you, "Oh, by the way, you are me," and then you're like, "What?" So you have to have him discover that, which I think being on that journey with him was really, really interesting. But also, I loved hearing his voice and Comstock voice, and they were different enough that like it didn't give up the game right at the beginning.
Yeah,
like hearing them over the like being able to hear that, I felt like helped keep the secret a little bit longer, which is great. But let's go to the narrative. So you're Booker DeWitt. You are in your office building. You're a PI, and you're settling a debt if you go bring back this girl. So you're on your way. You find a lighthouse. These two mysterious people, the Lutesses, are bringing you to this lighthouse. You end up in the sky out of nowhere, and then suddenly you're on the search for this girl who's been trapped to bring her back. This narrative for me was one of the coolest things, not only because it takes place in a world that I think is the fact that someone imagined all of this, the world of Columbia, a floating city in the sky where a bunch of giant racists and bigots seceded from the rest of the nation and then praise the founding fathers basically as prophets. And then there's Comstock, who himself is basically a direct link to God. And and then you're jumping around on skyhooks and traversing, and there's vigors, and like all of the fact that this world came out of somebody's brain blows my mind. It's so magical. I freaking love it.
Yeah.
But then you go and you take this amazingly like carefully threaded narrative of this guy going in, figuring out there's multiple timelines, it all diverges from him being baptized. And then in one timeline he says, "Yep, I'm going to be baptized." In one timeline he doesn't, and that's the separation. From there he decides to become, "I'm a new man. I'm Father Comstock." Big religious push. He creates what he's trying to take down in the other narrative, and then he doesn't take a baptism. He becomes Booker DeWitt. He gives away his child to settle a debt, and then he finds out his child is the same one that he's trying to rescue from the other timeline. Like, I was so blown away by this narrative when I found out that, oh my God, we're the same person. And I see the lighthouses for the first time, and I see all the lighthouses in the distance, and there's always a lighthouse. And then I think back and I'm like, oh my God, BioShock 1 and 2, and then there's a lighthouse. This is so cool how it kind of ties it together. Didn't even know Burial at Sea was a thing.
Yeah.
But it blows my mind how well it was woven together, how it was held as a surprise to the end, for me at least, that I didn't even see it coming until we get to some of those later parts with the lighthouses going from universe to universe. And I felt like it was done in such a way, especially with the Lutece characters, kind of weaving themselves into your story in random spots and what they choose to tell you and what they choose not to tell you at the same time. I thought it was brilliantly done. And I'd love to hear, Matt, what you liked about it, but I'd also love to hear, Holden, what you didn't like about it.
So I should clarify something. When I'm saying like the ending, I guess I kind of pictured like Burial Sea as the ending of this story. I liked how the Infinite ended. That was good. It didn't quite hit me as much as like BioShock Would You Kindly and all that stuff hit me. I thought that for me was a better revelation that just impacted me more. It's the Burial at Sea stuff that I am more critical of. But like that, like the jumping the timelines, I thought that was really cool because we'll get to Burial at Sea when we get to Burial at Sea. But I did like that part of the ending. Although it was a little rushed and it was very fast paced at the end. Like they just went to it and they just kept sticking to it for like a good 10 minutes. And I'm like, this is a 15-hour game. Holy shit, that's a lot for 10 minutes.
Yeah. The two parts of the storytelling that really stood out for me were the Lutece characters, absolutely, Chad, like that. I looked forward to those meetings when you met with those characters and they just randomly would show up playing the piano and whatever. That was great. And also the other one is when Booker gets not teleported, but when he wakes up in his office, and all of those with some of the Lutece characters. Sometimes Elizabeth is there, sometimes the baby is there. Those were all very interesting ways to tell the story, and I loved it. And it also gave me chills a lot of the times, like because you can tell that there's a lot of dread inside of Booker DeWitt. He in a lot of ways he's he's trying to bury away his past, and at the bottom of the typical PI, bottom of a bottle, he's drinking himself away, and I just thought that was really shown in those little scenes, and I thought that was just like really it really drew me in. Those two, what are the twins' names again? The Lutece characters and the parts of him as PI.
One thing about the Lutece people I didn't quite catch right off the bat is that they're not necessarily twins. They are the same person from two different timelines. In one timeline, she was born. Yeah, she was born in one scenario, one branch of the timeline, and she ends up becoming this brilliant quantum physicist and creates the particle that then makes Columbia possible. And then in another timeline, she's born as a man, and she goes and does completely different things. And then they happen to find each other. He was able to figure out the tears and all this kind of stuff. So they were able to find each other, and then they traveled around. They were dead in their universes, which is why they're able to travel around kind of as ghosts, but not exist in that one version of Columbia, as we'll find out through Burial at Sea is a thing.
Yeah. Okay, that's what I was. So that was the thing I was confused about. So thank you for explaining that. I wasn't quite sure about those two characters. I'm like, what their deal was, how they met. Was that explicitly laid out to us?
Comstock had them killed in the version of Columbia that we we are experiencing
in the main game. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Okay. The part of the game that I loved the most and just had this whoa, this is fucking epic, is when you are working with the gunsmith and you have to go to get a tool for him, and you create the tear, you go through, but it's a different version where DeWitt is taking over Columbia, and there's the big I'm like, this is fucking bananas, this is so cool. That was probably my favorite moment or level in any BioShock game. I just felt this because you go from you watch Rapture in the first game, and you're like, oh, how did this happen? How did it how did all this occur? How did it go to shit like that? Yeah. I mean, about the splicers and all that kind of stuff and how that happened, but you don't get to see it play out. And I felt like this is a kind of a cool way of saying, hey, this is how a world goes from Columbia, which is, I mean, obviously it's a fucking mess because it's built on really bad values, but it has to go from this more or less peaceful community to insanity. Mm-hmm. And it was cool to kind of see that kind of play out. Awesome moment just to see how it flipped that.
And
really cool.
That goes back to us talking about how, Booker is this character, him, what he looks like, what he sounds like. And for you to come out of that tear and then be walking around the city and see these gigantic posters, billboard-sized posters of his face, leading the resistance, in Columbia is awesome. It makes that payout way better, way bigger, and have way more of an impact. So that just goes back to, Booker's this who he is. This character in this world.
100%.
I really want them now to go back. I mean, hopefully this is the next BioShock game, is going back to Rapture and just showing how it went to shit. The game takes place when it's nice and peaceful, and then how the splicers go and take over.
We get so close to seeing that in Burial at Sea Part 2.
Yeah, we'll get there.
Before we move on to talking about Burial at Sea, I wanted to bring in, we have a couple of people who have thoughts on the game. Here's one from Dallas, who's in the Twitch chat right now. Dallas says, here are my thoughts. Downloading the collection through PSN was terribly and unnecessarily confusing. Didn't actually play any of it because Chad said I had to play the first one before playing Infinite. So it's Chad's fault I didn't play it. Thanks, Chad. You're welcome.
You don't have to play the first one.
No, you absolutely should play the first one before you play BioShock Infinite.
You definitely should play the first one.
And you 100% should play
Burial
at
Sea.
No, you should play the first one before you play Infinite too. The second one is from Alex. Alex wrote in an email with his thoughts on just BioShock Infinite, not Burial at Sea. He says, hey, RAF crew, it's the one and only Alexander Cosino writing in my thoughts on BioShock Infinite. Personally, BioShock Infinite is a great example of a game that doesn't do anything in particular that I think is overly bad or problematic, but that I nevertheless feel falls short of greatness. Personally, I think the large part of what keeps me from loving it is how much grander Irrational Games wanted Infinite to be, an open-world-ish shooter whose story direction could be significantly influenced by choices made by the player, and how much comparatively quainter in terms of scope it ended up being. In my opinion, I think I'm most disappointed by the minuscule amount of lore behind Columbia's origins and ideology. I felt that I had much less of a sense of what Columbia and its inhabitants were about compared to Rapture and its inhabitants, but that's just me. That being said, I played through Infinite again on 1999 mode after I played it for the first time so that I could get that platinum, and while it didn't change my mind about the most issues with the game, it did make me appreciate the intricacies of its combat system a fair bit more. In particular, I found the charge vigor, which I had written off in my first playthrough, as it's being mostly useless, to be really effective in 1999 mode after a really tough combat encounter forced me to give the vigor a second look. So yeah, to me, BioShock Infinite was no masterpiece, but it's undeniably well made, and I think that its combat system deserves more praise than it gets. Thank you, Alex, definitely for writing in. 100%. I'm only at 2 hours into the 1999 mode, and I found that oh my god, these vigors that I thought were completely useless are now going to be so useful. I 100% agree with you on that one. But the lore in
what is 1999 mode?
Is the super hard mode that you open up at the end of the game. Once you beat it, you unlock 1999 mode, or you can just enter the Konami code on the menu screen and unlock it too.
But what makes it harder though? Is it just more damage? Like, what is it that makes it harder?
You take more damage, you give more damage. That's about it. Traditional difficulty scaling.
Okay, gotcha.
What surprised me though is the point you made about the minuscule amount of lore behind Columbia's origins and ideology. As I was playing for the trophy, I had to get all of the audio logs and things like that, and I felt like there was so much there. Like the richness, especially, and again, we'll get to it in a second, Burial at Sea, like that revelation behind all of the lore. But I felt like there was so much there to pick up on that if you're looking for it, and if you're listening to all the voxophones, there's a lot to uncover.
Yeah.
Let's jump into Burial at Sea. So this is something that I had not ever played before. This was new to me, just like when we played BioShock 2. I had never played Minerva's Den, but I played it for BARF. Burial at Sea, as we mentioned, was DLC. It's in 2 parts, and it takes you back to Rapture. Part 1, you play as Booker, a different Booker. This is Elizabeth waking up as the last Elizabeth after the events of BioShock Infinite. She's trying to go kill all the... She's found one more Comstock that exists and one more Booker that exists. And she's trying to convince the Booker to go kill the Comstock. And you go back to Rapture, and I thought it was really, really cool. I've always talked about, like we talked about on the show, what would make a good TV show for a video game? I was like, I want to see Rapture in its heyday. I want to see it before everything goes to shit. I want to see how cool it is, and then I want to see it go to shit. I thought that would be a really cool thing. So I love being able to see Rapture completely undestroyed, people going like to stores and restaurants and things like that, and like not vigors. What are they called in BioShock? Oh shit! What are they called?
The splicers?
Plasmids.
Yeah,
plasmids.
like plasmids, like being a common thing, and I thought that was incredibly cool to see. I didn't so much love the gameplay of the first Burial at Sea, though. But I did like kind of the twist at the end. You get to the end of that story, and it's all about Elizabeth trying to kill Booker himself because he let that God, it's all so complicated. That version of Elizabeth, her head was cut off by the portal in that version of the timeline instead of her pinky, which gave her powers. And so she was trying to kill him for that mistake.
Yes.
God,
but also he was the last end, right? He was the last DeWitt, the last Booker DeWitt.
Right. And at the very end, you find out that he's actually Comstock, but he's taken on when he moved to Rapture, he took on this new personality to try to forget the guilt of killing his daughter by cutting off her head through the portal. And so you've been playing as Comstock.
He took a different route than the other.
Yeah.
Very, very cool. I think I like the gameplay of Burial at Sea Part 2 more than I liked Part 1, but the story in Part 1 was the end was such a gut punch that I think I don't know, I can't say I liked it better than Part 2, but I thought it was really really good. And going back and playing in Rapture after I played Burial at Sea Part 1 right after I finished Infinite, the main story. And so going from Columbia and then going to Rapture was so awesome. Like, yeah, I had said earlier I liked Columbia more than I liked Rapture, but that doesn't mean that, like, you know, it felt like an old friend. And going back to Rapture was so cool, and to see and like you said, I didn't know that they had to remake all of that for this game, which is super cool.
Yeah.
But it all felt exactly like I remember it from 1 and 2. So that was just to like go back in there and continue the story of Rapture was really cool. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, and to see what's his face, the crazy guy who's all obsessed with like art and making people dance and then murdering them. Like he's
Oh, yeah,
already a
what's his name?
psychopath.
Cohen?
Yeah.
But then to see him like it's still kind of socially acceptable in Rapture before they go crazy. Like that was really cool to see him and have that little side quest.
Yeah.
Well, I had this in that scene where he's doing the painting and he's having the people dance in front of them, but because they didn't do it the way he wanted to or didn't invoke the emotion he wanted to, he just electrocutes them and kills them. I had to remember, I'm like, oh shit, that's right. You can do anything you want in Rapture. There are no laws.
Yeah.
Like you can do whatever you want. And I'm like, that's so fucked up. That is so fucked up that he'd be allowed to do that.
Yep.
But he was. So with Burial at Sea, when I was playing BioShock Infinite, what I liked about it is I'm like, oh, BioShock is... This is how I was interpreting it while playing it, at least. BioShock is doing what like Final Fantasy and Legend of Zelda do, which is that like here's a new game, but it really doesn't have anything to do with the other games.
There are elements that are the
my
same,
brother's
like
calling me.
plasmids and vigors are similar. Yeah.
Exactly. And then as soon as Burial Sea started to like combine everything together, I'm like, no, don't explain it. Why are you doing this? And I really, really didn't like that. I didn't need those connections. I didn't need Atlas to get this like piece of paper that said "Would you kindly" on it to like explain that that's how he was. I mean, like I didn't need that, and it kind of like now when I go back and play BioShock, I feel like I'm gonna be like, oh yeah, Atlas is telling me all this because Elizabeth handed him a piece of paper at the very end of the game, and oh, Big Daddies and Songbirds are kind of similar because there was a portal that connected both of those worlds. And I'm just like, I didn't need any of that, and I'm actually a little upset that they did. For me, it didn't work, and I really liked this idea of like BioShock is like this set of gameplay mechanics and like a certain like type of world building mindset that I think is really cool and unique. That they kind of got from System Shock. That I really want to go back and play System Shock because of that. And the intermingling didn't work for me. Like now I'm like, I used to be like, I think a few months ago we were talking about how they announced BioShock 4, they're officially working on it, and how I'm like, oh, how cool would it be if they like went to like, because Elon Musk kind of made this reference, what if they did like a space station on Mars? It's like the first colony and it goes to shit and like do something like that. Like that would be kind of cool. But now I'm like, well, they really, I don't know if they could do that because I don't know like how this interdimensional connecting of everything works, and I don't know, it kind of made me a little less excited for the future of BioShock.
I agree with you that I love that BioShock has a way of world building that is unmatched, and they made this completely realized underwater city and culture and society in BioShock Infinite with the music and everything like there. And then they made something completely different in Columbia, like polar opposite. It's in the sky, has completely different politics and all this kind of stuff up there. Sorry, I mentioned music. I just want to give a shout out to the music of Columbia, the music of BioShock Infinite.
Oh, so good.
All of the the covers that are like a little anachronistic. They're like not quite in the right timeline, but they're like barbershop versions of shit. Or there's the girls just want to have fun on the accordion on the beach, and it's just like shout out to that. Anyway, it's worlds being completely different, but. And if we do see BioShock 4, I think because of Burial at Sea Part 2, it has to be something completely different. Because Burial at Sea Part 2, I think, takes this trilogy of games, or really it's actually just the first game in Infinite, and it makes it Booker DeWitt's story. Like, one happens because of a choice. All of it comes back to whether or not Booker DeWitt, after the Battle of Wounded Knee, decides if he's going to get baptized or not. Everything in BioShock Infinite and 1 happens because of that choice. So that's all tied together there. And I think there's no way to weave in another narrative elsewhere in a completely different thing that's all influenced by that as expertly as I think it was done. But what I did, I was on the complete opposite side of things. I was like, I see similarities in these things, and I just figured it's a gameplay thing. Like, oh yeah, BioShock is certain things. You have powers, and you have guns that work a certain way. You have big metal, like armored enemies that are hard. Like that's just like a staple of what it is. But it's to see story connections and like they unfold environmentally as well. Like you first get to the display case where you see the Big Daddy, like him trying to recreate a Big Daddy, and then the bird next to it, and it's like, oh, they're kind of borrowing from each other. And then you find out that the portals left open from Elizabeth, and they found a way to open it up and work together and collaborate. And then knowing that in the future, in Rapture, and then way back in the past in Columbia, like they were creating the same stuff from sea slugs, and he was like going to get the atom from sea slugs, and they found out, man, if you just make it an injectable up in Rapture, it's 10 times more effective, and you don't have to have as much atom, and it's so much less effective than the vigors that you guys are using in Columbia. Like to see all of these things being like brought together and explaining each other, I thought was really, really cool. But then to see how Elizabeth works into all of that as well. Like, because one day her pinky gets cut off in a portal, like, all of this fucking starts, I thought was so incredibly cool. And to see that even the Would You Kindly, and, like, seeing her on the airplane. I'm still not quite sure. I don't think she's actually on the airplane, but she gets to that where she has that line where she's like, I've seen all possibilities, or I've seen behind all the doors, so she can see everything that happened in the future, past, and like she can't currently do it, but she can remember her past memories of her doing that.
Yeah.
So I think she's just like looking at the original guy in BioShock on the plane do this thing. Like, it fucking blows my mind how expertly crafted it had to be in order to make all of those connections make sense in retrospect. Like, I don't think they had Elizabeth in mind when they were creating BioShock 1, but to tie that all together afterwards is incredible to me.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, and it doesn't feel stretched or pressed in there at all. It feels totally natural. To me, it feels totally natural, and I just loved how they wrapped it all together. And I think you're right. This is Booker's story, and this all, I think, wraps up in a nice bow. So whatever comes after this, I would expect it to be something totally. I think it would be something totally different, but borrowing, like you said, Holden, like the same game mechanics, some of the same mechanics, but somewhere else in a different story.
I don't think it would have bothered me if this was BioShock 3. I think because it was BioShock Infinite, I'm like, oh, this is a separate thing. And so to me, it kind of felt like forced in. Like, oh, we're going to make this DLC. And by the way, it's just going to combine everything together. It reminded me of two things, both were Star Wars related. The first is midichlorians. It just reminded me of that midichlorian conversation where I'm just like, I didn't need to know about midichlorians. I just didn't need to know about it. It doesn't ruin Star Wars, but it was a little too much for me. But then, do you guys know what George Lucas's plan was for episode 7, 8, and 9? You guys heard the rumors? The rumors are that he was doing this thing called the Wills. And the Wills are this like super, divine alien race that are like microscopic and control the Force, therefore control all events that are happening because they are the will of the universe.
Okay.
And like everything in the past 6 movies is supposed to be explained by what the Wills were trying to make happen, because they were the ones who made Luke powerful to bring balance to the Force. And I'm like, that would have been awful. It would have been so bad if that had happened. And like, I couldn't not think about that while I was playing Burial at Sea. But I totally get like why those moments are a really cool moment for a fan, where you walk in and you see the songbird being like basically programmed to respond like certain ways. Basically, like, I can totally see how those connections are really, really cool for super fans of the franchise. I think for me, I was always more taken by the gameplay of the games, even though like I wanted to see Rapture and kind of how that like evolution occurred. Like, I wanted to see Rapture as this contained world. And when I think about like Rapture, I think about Columbia, it's like obviously these far-fetched locations that could never actually happen, but because it's so well realized and executed, I'm like, oh, and I look in the ocean, Rapture could be down there. When I look at the sky, like Columbia could be up there. And as soon as like interdimensional connections to the things, and I'm like, it's not real to me anymore. Like, it doesn't have that, like, it could be like in the world that I live in. And I don't know, for me that was lost. But I'm here's the thing, I'm really glad for most people didn't have that reaction. It seems like I'm kind of in the minority on that one, because this is a really important franchise, I think, in gaming. And so like the fact that it didn't have like a midichlorian moment that ruined like the fan, like not the fan base, but like ruined it for so many fans, and then it made Star Wars this really divisive, like obnoxious thing sometimes on the internet.
Yeah.
Like, really glad that didn't happen with BioShock. For me personally, like, I could do without Burial at Sea. I'll just play BioShock 1, 2, and Infinite, and I'll play the next one too.
Oh, I hear what you're saying. I feel like Burial at Sea is so crucial to the story of all 3 games, not even just Infinite. I think it's so crucial.
Yeah, and you and I were having a discussion like it's weird that it's DLC, but it's also not weird that it's DLC.
Yeah, right. It doesn't feel, it feels weird that it's DLC and also not, because it would felt weird being attached to the game and you just continue and play that after you finish the events of the main game of BioShock. You know what I mean? But also, how would you serve this to the people that want to play it? Like, or how do you fit it in the story like that? And I guess DLC is the way you do it. I just don't know how to say it otherwise, you know? Like, that's just, and that's how they did it, and that's how we consumed it, and I think that's, it couldn't have been attached to it, bottom line.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I'm interested to know how many people out
guys-
there are, like, they haven't played Burial at Sea. That they played Infinite just like me. Like, they played Infinite, and they thought, man, that was a really cool contained story.
Yeah.
And they have no idea how it ties into the rest of the franchise. Because it's DLC.
Up until 2 weeks ago.
Exactly. Yeah, me too.
Up until 2 weeks ago, I haven't even heard of it. Like when I played BioShock in 2013, it must have been 2013, right, when it came out. I just played it and that was it. And I didn't really have my ear to the ground as far as game news. And so the DLC just went right past me, and that was it. And then now that we're playing it now, you're like, also play Burial at Sea 1 and 2. And I'm like, okay, like what could this be? And I find it so crucial, and I'm like kicking myself for not have, experienced it sooner. So.
And that's the weird thing for me too, is it feels like, that's why I was saying, like, I wasn't crisp with the ending. I had to remind myself, like, that wasn't the ending of Infinite. Like, that was a separate experience, but it very much feels like a continuation of the story of Infinite, so much so that I'm like, I don't think that you could have just tacked on Burial at Sea to the end of Infinite because of the huge gameplay differences between the two. It would have been like a really odd, like, people like to criticize like Dark Knight, for example, for having that kind of fourth act, even though it's a really successful fourth act in my opinion. This would have been like an odd fourth act at the end of the game pace as it was, but I think they could have managed it in a way that they kept that pace going and didn't go into stealth mechanics, didn't kind of weaken Elizabeth's character in terms of gameplay compared to like Booker DeWitt, and like kind of just kept BioShock in rapture like they were kind of doing. I think that could have worked better. I think it's part of it, just it's so odd to me it's a separate experience when it's so like, I mean, my complaints aside, like, it is necessary for the lore that they are going for in this franchise. It's very odd. Whereas you compare that to Minerva's Den, which is a completely separate, unrelated story that just happens to exist in the world. I don't think BioShock 1 had any DLC, did it?
It had challenge rooms, I believe. Like, no story DLC for sure.
Okay.
I would love to know where the creators, like, I would love to know when the events during Burial at Sea 1 and 2 came up to the creators, and I would love to know like where it all fit in the creation of Infinite. I would love to know that creative process, and maybe that video is out there somewhere in an interview or whatever.
Like when they were storyboarding,
I would love to know that.
Infinite, did they have this like, guys, we're gonna make a separate story that ties everything together, or were they just like, did they finish Infinite? Obviously, they didn't finish Infinite, and then 9 months later they had DLC that they were like, surprise, we've come up with something brand new off the top of our heads. But yeah, I would love to know when they decided they were going to make that connection.
I want to take a second and talk about Suchong, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So Suchong gets brought up in Burial at Sea Part 2, and a lot of the game is spent looking for him, getting the hair sample for him, and then going through his laboratories. Right, that's what we're going through at the last. This is laboratories.
Yeah, the department.
I had
Fink's
such a good time.
Department store, not Fink, but yeah, the department store. And then he's like saying,
Fontaine, right?
He said, "We found the tear here. I'm now turning your department store into my laboratory because this tear is in the middle of it." And yeah,
yes. I had such a good time, like walking through his labs and screenshotting all of the chalkboards and reading all the writings. Like, I had never done that. And one of the ones that stood out to me was a board where they were designing 3 vigors or 3 plasmids that were not ever brought to market. And the notes are hilarious. I'm going to read 3 of them for you. So one of them is Amnesia. And the byline is, forget everything you know. And then marketing note, how do you plan to sell this? And which I just thought was funny. And then there was another one, Plant Peeper. The byline is, read the inner thoughts of your houseplant. And then the marketing note below it is no demand for this type of product, exclamation point. And then the last one, which I find hilarious, is Dead Ringer. Byline is reanimate dead loved ones and pets. And then the marketing note is no one wants a moldy puppy, which I almost dropped my controller from laughing so hard. I was like, nobody wants a moldy puppy. It's so good.
You're right though. Like we talk about games like
yeah.
Control, where I'm like, man, I want to read everything and listen to all the diaries. But this is a game where like those aren't even like notes that you pick up or an audio thing that you pick up and listen to. They're just like part of the world. And I found myself just reading the walls everywhere that I went and looking what's on the desks and how does
Like
that fit
totally optional.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, so good. And then you're going through and you're seeing, like you were saying before, you see the first iterations of the Big Daddy suit and the smaller version of Songbird. And then you see the large version of Songbird, like the suit, I guess, essentially, that does like a superhuman gigantic person wear that? Do we ever get the answer to that? There's a crosscut section of it, and you see that it's a person.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that I think. First, you see the gorilla, the giant gorilla that are trying to figure out how to imprint on the girl. But then you see, you're right, it's like the cross section of the Songbird, and there's the machine, like the machine where if you pump the thing that blows the air, then it makes the Songbird do this little thing with its head. And then you see the diagram on the chalkboard of like the Da Vinci man, half of it's man, half of it's Songbird. I think eventually it is a man inside Songbird operating it like a giant puppet, and he's been brainwashed so and like imprinted and
Then how did the music work then? Because the music can tell the Songbird what to do.
That's all part of the brainwashing.
I think that's maybe just programmed into the yeah.
Okay.
So I thought that was Suchong's laboratory was awesome. The payoff for when Suchong gets killed brutally, like by the Big Daddy drill.
Yeah.
I mean, you get that satisfaction right after you listen to an audio log where Suchong tells its subject to break a puppy's neck, and I was like, I have the notes. I said, Suchong audio diary, break that puppy's neck, and then my next words are, oh fuck you, and then right after that he gets absolutely fucking murdered by that Big Daddy, which was so perfect.
Yeah.
I wanted that at that moment, and he got it. It was great.
Yeah, you don't hurt puppies to get away with it.
That was a hard audio.
The Big Daddy will
that
come
was
after
a tough,
you.
like Suchong. Like I was like, okay,
I thought Suchong's laboratory was fascinating.
It was amazing, but that was the turning point when I heard that diary. I was like, oh no, you're gonna fucking die. But there are two things about that moment where he gets killed that are really interesting to me. One is that like that's the moment that Big Daddy's learned how to imprint with little sisters. And it's all caused because of Elizabeth in that moment. And it's nothing that Suchong did in any of his experiments or anything like that. But then another little interesting fact that I read on the internet that I totally forgot about is that entire scene where he gets killed by the Big Daddy is an audio log that you find in BioShock 1. So you listen to that scene happen in BioShock 1, and then we get to see it play out from Elizabeth's perspective in BioShock Infinite.
I love that. I love
so
that I have to
cool.
go back and listen to. That's awesome. That's so great. So I'm glad you brought that up because that brings up the whole other thing where you're going through. I think there was not in part 1, but part 2. You're going through and Elizabeth is talking to a Booker DeWitt that doesn't exist.
Right.
It's just her mind talking back to her because all the Booker DeWitts have been extinguished. There are no more Booker DeWitts. There are no more Comstocks. It's just her mind talking to herself. And when she needs him, he comes and talks in some parts. But there's great moments where you're seeing the backside, almost like, like you're seeing from the one-way mirror events that happened in Infinite. That was when you go back to get the hair sample.
Yeah, when you're in the elevator going and you see the other two, like you and her waiting. And the fact that the way they describe time travel, where they're like, what happens if we run into each other? It's like, we won't run into each other because we didn't back then. It's like, oh, that's fucking setting up this world and the way time travel works in this world. It's so cool.
Yes.
Anything else you guys have to say about this game?
Yep. Love that. That is a...
Go for it.
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, that was you can always say, like, you can always tell how time travel is if it's handled well or not that great with that. Like they were able to explain the rules of that time travel in just that one sentence, and it didn't feel forced. It didn't feel like shoehorned in there. It was just that is the facts, and then right from there you get it. You understand.
Yep.
So thought that was great.
Anything else about BioShock Infinite, guys?
No. I think I said everything.
I wanna shout out Noah Caldwell Gervais. He has a YouTube channel. If you just search Noah Caldwell, it'll come up. But he has a great video on explaining Elizabeth's, like, the inner monologue she has with Booker and the deeper meaning to it and all that. And I thought it was a great video. It would be hard for me to summarize here, but I would highly suggest to go, if you're interested in that thing, that sort of thing, go watch it. It's pretty fascinating. So
dope. Well, thank you, Matt, for joining us on our discussion of BioShock Infinite and Burial at Sea. Next month, the month of April, you all voted. We are playing Yoshi's Island, Super Mario World 2. Yeah! So break that out on your Switch with your Nintendo Online subscription. It'll be the first time you've ever used that. You can also break it out on your Super Nintendo Classic or however else you might have it. So that's what we're playing. And that's it. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Do you think it's too similar to
Yes,
BioShock?
100%.
Might be too similar.